Imagine a story that has haunted our minds for over 100 years. It is a journey that has moved from the pages of a book into famous movies and deep philosophical debates. We are talking about Joseph Conrad's novella, Heart of Darkness. You might know it for that one chilling line, "The horror." The horror. It is a story about a river that pulls us away from the docks of London and deep into the tangled wilds of the Congo. This same dark path was later reimagined in the movie Apocalypse Now. Along this trip, we meet Marlowe, a man who does not really want to be the narrator, and Kurtz, a powerful ivory trader who lost his mind. Kurtz is a man whose final breath still echoes in our culture today. We will also look at how thinkers like Chinua Achebe, Edward Said, and Frantz Fanon have torn this story apart. They exposed the unfair colonial ideas hidden in the text, while still admitting that the story shows the darkness that lives inside every single human heart. Picture this scene. A foggy London dockyard. You can hear the loud clatter of steam whistles. A young man named Charles Marlowe steps onto a ship heading for a far-off continent. Marlowe tells us that he has always loved the sea. To him, the water feels like an old friend calling him home. Many of us feel that same pull for adventure. We feel it when we hear about exploration on a podcast or see a beautiful travel brochure. But Conrad does not give us a simple story about a hero discovering new lands. Instead, he gives us a map of moral confusion. The river does not just move forward into the jungle. It winds inward, into the soul. It is a journey that forces us to see how thin the line is between being civilized and being what some call savage. From the moment Marlowe hears about the mysterious Mr. Kurtz, the story feels like a myth. Kurtz is described as a man of great talent who went mad because of his own greatness. He is like a Prometheus of the Congo. He is a European man who became a god to the local people, using his power with a frightening, religious intensity. But as Marlowe sails deeper into the interior, the jungle seems to eat the ship whole. The air becomes thick and heavy with humidity. Everything smells like rotting plants. In the distance, the cries of hidden creatures sound like the inner panic of the crew. In that crushing heat, the story begins to strip away the comfortable lies about the civilizing mission. Marlowe tells the story in a way that is intentionally unclear. He notes that the agents of the company were not really interested in the people. They were only interested in the ivory. This one line explains the engine that drove the empire. Ivory, rubber, and gold were the raw materials that fed the factories and markets of Europe. The company used boring, official language to hide the violence. They turned murder into paperwork and cruelty into profit. As Marlowe travels up the river, he sees stations where men sit in the shade and smoke pipes. Their faces are lit by the flicker of oil lamps. But just outside the camp, the forest swallows the screams of people being punished for resisting. Seeing men in fancy clothes committing barbaric acts creates a strange clash. It forces us to ask a hard question. Who is the real savage here? Kurtz is the man at the center of this moral storm. He represents the total collapse of the European mask. When Marlowe finally reaches the inner station, he finds a man who built his own kingdom based on fear and worship. The local people have painted his portrait on the walls. They speak his name with a mix of respect and terror. But Kurtz is dying. His body is full of disease and his mind is sliding into madness. In his final moments, he whispers, "The horror. The horror." People have analyzed these words for years. Some think he is admitting he feels guilty. Others think he is pointing out that all humans are capable of evil. What is clear is that Kurtz feels two types of horror. First, he sees the horror in himself. He realizes his high ideals were corrupted by greed. Second, he sees the horror he perk. Imagine a world where the thin mask of civilization has completely peeled away. What is left is a raw, terrifying landscape built on blood and fueled by blood and exploitation. There is a famous phrase that echoes far beyond the pages of Joseph Conrad's story. The horror. The horror. These words found a second life in the movie Apocalypse Now. In that film, Colonel Walter Kurtz delivers a similar line while surrounded by the chaotic jungles of Vietnam. The director, Francis Ford Coppola, took the dark river of the Congo and moved it to the Mekong River. He swapped ivory for opium, but the core message stayed the same. Whether it is a colonial conquest or a brutal war, men can turn into monsters when they are stripped away from the laws and morals of society. Think of the helicopter attacks set to the music of Ride of the Valkyries, or the surreal sight of a soldier dancing on a beach. The relentless rain that drenches everything on screen makes it feel as though the deeper you travel into the heart of a conflict, the more your humanity simply dissolves. Both Conrad and Coppola use the river as a symbol for the unconscious mind. In simple terms, the river is like a flow of hidden desires, memories, and things we try to push down. As the character Marlowe steers his boat upstream, he is not just traveling across a map. He is traveling through his own mind, facing the dark parts of himself that he would rather keep hidden. It is the same for Captain Willard in Apocalypse Now. He is sent on a mission to terminate Kurtz, but his own inner thoughts mirror Marlowe's. Both men realize how pointless it is to try and force order onto total chaos. They both stare into the abyss, and both return home changed, or perhaps completely broken. The line between being civilized and being savage is not a clear wall. It is more like a blurry spectrum. In Heart of Darkness, the Europeans talk about bringing civilization, yet they commit crimes so terrible they would make a barbarian blush. The African characters in the story are mostly voiceless. They are shown as exotic or tragic figures. Because of this, critics like Chinua Achebe have argued that Conrad's view of Africans is fundamentally racist. Achebe believes Conrad reduces these people to shadows or masks, using them only to highlight the internal crisis of the white narrator. In his famous essay, An Image of Africa, Achebe argues that even though the story seems to be against imperialism, it actually reinforces the same stereotypes used to justify colonial rule. He suggests that Conrad's imagination is limited to a white European point of view, meaning his version of Africa is filtered through a lens of superiority. Edward Said adds another layer to this. In his work Culture and Imperialism, he acknowledges that Conrad critiques the excesses of empire. However, Said points out that the story still operates within a Western framework. The West is still the judge of what is right or wrong. The problem is not just what is said, but how the story is built. A Western narrator tells the tale, the other people remain silent, and the moral judgment is left to the European conscience. Said argues that this structure keeps a subtle form of cultural dominance alive, even while it tries to expose it. Conrad's own experience. Picture this: a young sailor, far from home, standing on the deck of a Belgian steamer as it cuts through the thick, humid air of the Congo River in 1890. The year is important. This is the height of Europe's scramble for Africa, when kings and corporations carved up a continent like it was a cake at a royal banquet. But for this sailor, Joseph Conrad, what began as just another job would become the raw material for one of the most haunting stories ever written, Heart of Darkness. Now, imagine stepping off that ship. On one side, you've got the polished brass and gleaming wood of the European steamer, clean, orderly, smelling of varnish and imported cigars. You turn your head, and there's the shore, muddy banks lined with chains of emaciated laborers, their ribs pressing against stretched skin, their eyes hollow under the weight of rubber quotas they can never meet. The air smells of sweat and something darker, something rotten. This wasn't just poverty. This was a system, finely tuned, where men in crisp white suits back in Brussels grew rich while men in tattered loincloths bled into the red clay. Conrad saw it all. And he wrote it down. But here's the thing: Conrad wasn't British. He was Polish, born in a country that didn't even exist on the map at the time, swallowed up by the Russian Empire. He'd spent his life as an outsider, a foreigner in France, a sailor under British flags, a man who spoke English with an accent so thick his shipmates sometimes struggled to understand him. So when he looked at the Congo, he saw it through a double lens, as a European, yes, but also as someone who knew what it was like to be crushed under the boot of an empire. Some say that's why his critique of colonialism cuts so deep, because he'd been on both sides of the fence. Others argue that no matter how sharp his pen, he was still writing from the deck of that steamer, still seeing Africa through European eyes, as a dark mirror for Europe's own sins rather than a place with its own light. Now, let's talk about how the story is told. Heart of Darkness isn't just a tale, it's a story within a story, like one of those Russian nesting dolls. Picture this: a group of men, comfortable in their wool suits, lounging on a yacht anchored on the Thames, the heart of the British Empire. The sun is setting, the tea is warm, and one of them, Marlowe, starts to speak. He tells them about his journey into the Congo, about the horror he found there. But here's the kicker: the men listening? They're sipping their tea, glancing at their pocket watches, half listening to a tale of atrocities as if it's just another after-dinner anecdote. Sound familiar? That's the genius of Conrad's setup. Because isn't that how we consume horror today? We scroll past war footage between cat videos. We tut-tut at headlines about famine while waiting for our coffee to cool. The distance between the comfortable listeners on that yacht and the suffering in the Congo is the same distance between us and the crises we see on our screens, close enough to see, far enough to ignore. Conrad didn't just write a story about colonialism. He wrote a story about how stories get told, and who gets to walk away when they're over. Now, fast forward to today, and Heart of Darkness is everywhere. You've heard the phrase, even if you've never cracked the book, into the heart of darkness. It's shorthand now for any journey into hidden rot, whether it's a journalist exposing a corporate cover-up, a whistleblower in a government scandal, or even that moment in a relationship when you realize the person you love isn't who you thought. The image of a lone man steering a boat up a river, not knowing what horrors wait in the fog? That's been borrowed by video games, movies, even those cheesy corporate seminars where they warn you about the dark side of power. But here's the irony: the more the phrase gets used, the more it gets drained of its original weight. We say Heart of Darkness to describe a tough quarter at work, and suddenly, the real darkness, the kind that leaves bodies in its wake, starts to fade into metaphor. Let's pull back the curtain on the symbols that haunt both Conrad's book and Francis Ford Coppola's Apocalypse Now, because that film isn't just inspired by Heart of Darkness, it's a bloody, napalm-scented cousin to it. Start with light and dark. In the novella, Marlowe describes the sunset on the Congo as a blackness that seemed to swallow the whole sky. Think about that. The sun is symbol of life, of clarity, gets devoured by the dark. It's not just night falling. It's the idea that even the brightest things can be swallowed by evil if we let them. Now jump to Apocalypse Now, the Vietnamese jungle at night, lit up by flares and tracer fire. The darkness isn't just absence of light, it's active, hungry, swallowing the screams of soldiers and the roar of helicopters whole. And the fire? In the Congo, it's villages burning to pacify the locals. In Vietnam, it's napalm strikes turning jungles into infernos. Both times, the people dropping the matches call it cleansing. Funny how destruction always gets dressed up as purification. Then there's the music. In Heart of Darkness, Conrad writes about the sound of African drums, a kind of music that seemed to come from the very earth itself. It's not just noise. It's the heartbeat of a land that doesn't care about European time signatures or sheet music. It's wild, untamed, and to the colonial ear, maybe a little terrifying because it doesn't bend to their rules. Now cue up Apocalypse Now. You've got Wagner's Ride of the Valkyries blasting from helicopters as they strafe a village. Classical music, symbol of high culture, of civilization, turned into the soundtrack for massacre. And then there's the Doors, the Rolling Stones, the rock and roll that plays over scenes of chaos, like the old world's order is cracking and all that's left is noise. The clash isn't just between armies. It's between rhythms, between the music of the colonizer and the music of the land they're trying to conquer. And then there's Kurtz. Oh, Kurtz. In the book, he starts as the golden boy of the company, a man sent to bring civilization to the Congo. But the deeper he goes into the jungle, the more the jungle gets into him. By the time Marlowe finds him, Kurtz isn't a man anymore. He's a god. The locals worship him. His own men fear him. And his famous scrawl, "Exterminate all the brutes," isn't just a command. It's the moment idealism curdles into madness. He didn't start out evil. He started out sure. Sure he was right. Sure the ends justified the means. Sound familiar? Now jump to Apocalypse Now, and Colonel Kurtz, played by Marlon Brando, sweating in the shadows, isn't just a rogue officer. He's a prophet of the absurd. His horror isn't just about what he's seen. It's about what he's realized, that all the rules, all the flags and medals and speeches about democracy, are just pretty wrappers around the same old violence. When he tells Willard, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," it's not just a cool movie line. It's the moment you realize that war isn't about winning. It's about the rush of power, the thrill of being untethered from the rules. And that's the real horror, not that Kurtz went mad, but that his madness makes a twisted kind of sense. At the start of his journey, Marlowe is a man who believes in order. He thinks he can keep his morals intact while sailing into the heart of the Congo. He trusts that right and wrong are clear lines, like the banks of a river. But what he sees along the way chips away at that belief. By the end, he carries the weight of Kurtz's lifeless body in his mind, the blank stare of the African helmsman who died at his side, and the slow-sinking truth: there is no clean line between civilized and savage. It's not something you can draw in the sand. It shifts. It blurs. And sometimes, it vanishes. When Marlowe returns to Europe, he doesn't feel relief. The streets, the homes, the polite talk, they all seem hollow. Like a stage set with nothing real behind it. The darkness he saw in the jungle didn't stay there. It followed him back. It lives inside him now. His final words, "We live in a world of light and darkness, and we must learn to balance the two," aren't just about one man's journey. They're a warning. A whisper that progress, technology, empire, none of it wipes out evil. It might even feed it. Heart of Darkness didn't disappear after Conrad wrote it. It kept echoing. Writers from colonized lands picked up its threads and wove them into new stories. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, Chinua Achebe, Nadine Gordimer, they didn't throw the book away. Instead, they answered it. Achebe's Things Fall Apart shows us the Igbo people not as silent shadows in the jungle, but as a living community. Full of tradition, debate, joy, and conflict. A society with its own rhythm long before Europeans arrived. His novel says plainly, Africa was never empty. It was never waiting to be discovered. It was already full. Ngugi as a grain of wheat digs into Kenya's fight for independence. It shows how colonialism leaves scars that don't heal quickly. The pain passes down. It shapes how people see themselves, their leaders, their future. These writers don't erase Conrad. They stand beside him and then step forward. They say, yes, he showed the cruelty of empire. But he didn't show us the people who lived through it. Their voices matter too. In recent years, some scholars have looked at Heart of Darkness in a different light, through the lens of nature. The Congo River once stood for wildness, mystery, danger. Now, we see it differently. It's not just a symbol. It's a real place. A fragile web of life. Today, that river faces threats: trees cut down, mines tearing open the earth, climate change drying its tributaries. The same river that carried steamboats hunting ivory now carries the weight of modern greed. Multinational companies move in. They pull out minerals. They pollute water. They push people aside. The pattern feels familiar. History repeats. The metaphorical darkness in Conrad's story now includes dying forests, poisoned fish, silenced communities. Exploitation hasn't changed. Only the tools have gotten sharper. Then there's the question of meaning. What do we hold on to when everything around us feels broken? Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, spent his life asking this. He created logotherapy, a way of healing built on one idea: humans can endure almost anything if they find meaning in it. In his book Man's Search for Meaning, he writes, "When we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves." That's not about giving up. It's about finding power where you can. Marlowe finds his meaning in telling the story. He doesn't fix the horror. He can't undo what happened. But he bears witness. He gives shape to the chaos. That act, speaking the truth, becomes his anchor. Kurtz, on the other hand, loses himself. He has power, wealth, fear on his side. But no purpose beyond desire. No moral compass. His ambition eats him alive. He dies screaming, "The horror! The horror!" Not in rage, but in realization. He sees what he became. Too late. Their paths show us something deep: meaning isn't given. It's chosen. Without it, even the strongest person can fall into cruelty. With it, even in darkness, a person can remain human. This struggle isn't just in books. It plays out in real lives. In the Congo, people held on to meaning through song, story, ritual, even when colonizers tried to wipe those things away. In Vietnam, soldiers like Captain Willard wandered through war zones asking, "Why am I here?" Some found reasons: loyalty to comrades, hope for peace. Others drowned in the madness. The film ends with Willard driving away from Kurtz's compound. The jungle fades in the rearview. But his face shows no peace. Just exhaustion. Relief, maybe. But also doubt. Escaping the place doesn't mean escaping the damage. The old idea of civilization versus savagery keeps showing up in literature. Jonathan Swift used it in Gulliver's Travels. He made fun of European pride by showing tiny Lilliputians obsessed with silly rules, while the horse-like Howans lived with calm wisdom. Who's really civilized? The joke is on us. Emily Bronte did something similar in Wuthering Heights. The wild moors aren't just scenery. They mirror the storm inside the characters. Passion, revenge, love, they can't be tamed by fancy clothes or drawing room manners. Society's polish is thin. Scratch it, and raw emotion spills out. These stories agree on one thing: being civilized isn't automatic. It's not guaranteed by skin color, language, or technology. It's tested. Again and again. And sometimes it fails. The river, always the river. In ancient Egypt, the Nile was sacred. It brought life. It fed crops. It flowed with the rhythm of Ma'at, balance, truth, order. The Egyptians saw it as divine. In the Congo, the river looks the same on the surface. Water. Current. Reflections. But here, it serves a different master. It carries ivory. Rubber. Greed. Steamboats glide over it like ghosts, hauling out riches while leaving ruin behind. And as men travel its length, the river reflects not life, but decay. Not order, but corruption. It becomes a mirror. Not for gods, but for the souls who sail upon it. In Apocalypse Now, the Mekong River works two ways at once. It carries American military power deeper into the region. At the same time, it's the route insurgent fighters use to resist that same power. Across both stories, the river acts as a liminal space. Think of it like a doorway between two worlds. The familiar world you know fades away, and the unknown rushes in. It's in that in-between space that characters face their deepest fears and desires. We as viewers get to question whether our own ideas of right and wrong are as steady as we think they are. The lasting relevance of Heart of Darkness shows up clearly in today's debates about corporate responsibility and global capitalism. Modern multinational companies operate in regions full of valuable natural resources. Often, they use tactics almost identical to the exploitative practices of the company in Conrad's story. They force people off their land to secure rights to resources. They outsource labor to poor countries where workers are paid very low wages. They lobby governments to keep trade rules that favor their profits. There's even a term for a pattern tied to this, the resource curse. It describes how countries with lots of minerals or oil often end up stuck with corruption, violent conflict, and very little development for their regular citizens. This is a modern echo of the tragic history of the Congo. If policymakers and business leaders study Conrad's narrative, they can learn about the real human cost of chasing profit without any limits. They can see why it's so important to build ethical rules into how companies are run. In schools, Heart of Darkness is still a staple of university curricula. It's taught in literature, history, and philosophy classes. But educators are increasingly urged to teach the text alongside critical perspectives that address its problematic representations. When lessons include Chinua Achebe's famous essay, Frantz Fanon's analyses, and modern post-colonial critiques, students get a far more nuanced understanding. They can appreciate the artistic skill of Conrad's writing. At the same time, they can see the ethical flaws built into the story. This kind of teaching builds critical thinking. It encourages learners to question where knowledge comes from and what power dynamics shape the stories we're told. As we wrap up this deep dive, let's reflect on the core insights that tie all the threads we've covered together. First, the darkness Conrad and Coppola portray isn't limited to one geographic location. It's a part of human consciousness that surfaces whenever power is exercised without anyone holding the powerful accountable. Second, the river, whether it's the Congo, the Nile, or the Mekong, is a powerful metaphor. It stands for the flow of history, the movement of ideas, and the unstoppable passage of time. That current carries both oppression and resistance downstream, no matter what. Third, the figures of Marlowe and Kurtz embody two very different paths people can take. Marlowe chooses to bear witness. He puts into words the things that feel too terrible to speak aloud. Kurtz, by contrast, gives in to the seductive pull of absolute authority. He loses his capacity for moral reflection entirely. Fourth, the critical voices of Achebe, Edward Said, Fanon, and others remind us that literature can't be read in a vacuum. The act of storytelling is never neutral. The stories we choose to elevate shape collective memory and group identity. Finally, the teachings of Viktor Frankl offer a hopeful counterpoint to the bleakness of imperial exploitation. He emphasized the human capacity to find purpose even in the most harrowing circumstances. His work gives us a roadmap for resilience. Whether it's a Congolese survivor rebuilding community after the fall of the colonial regime, a Vietnamese villager preserving cultural traditions amidst bombings, or a modern activist campaigning for environmental justice, meaning can be cultivated through acts of solidarity, creativity, and ethical commitment. All in all, Heart of Darkness remains a vital text because it forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. The line separating what we call civilization from what we call savagery is much thinner than we like to admit. Its influence ripples through cinema, philosophy, post-colonial theory, and contemporary social discourse. If we engage with the novella critically, acknowledging its literary brilliance while interrogating its Eurocentric blind spots, we can better understand the mechanisms of oppression that persist today. Maybe, we can even chart a course toward a more humane future. As we turn the page toward the river's source, it is worth pausing to consider the very geography that Conrad rendered both literal and metaphorical. The upper reaches of the Congo, its headwaters in the highlands of what is today the Democratic Republic of the Congo, were once mapped by European explorers. Imagine a young sailor named Marlowe stepping onto a riverboat in the heart of Africa. He feels the weight of history pressing on his shoulders as the boat chugs forward. The river ahead looks like a dark ribbon winding through a vast green carpet. Yet the floodplains were far from empty. They held the Kuba Kingdom with its sophisticated art, the Lunda Confederation's busy trade networks, and countless riverine communities whose oral histories stretch back farther than any European pen. When Marlowe describes the jungle as unexplored, he is really looking through a lens that mixes geographic unknown with cultural invisibility. Later critics such as Chinua Achebe would call this a literary erasure. The darkness of the river mirrors the psychological currents described by Frantz Fanon in The Wretched of the Earth. Fanon argued that colonial rule creates a zone of non-being where the colonized person is forced to see themselves through the colonizer's eyes, splitting their identity. In Heart of Darkness, Kurtz starts with high ideals to civilize, but his vision twists into a personal reign of terror. He builds a microstate where the native people become silent witnesses. Fanon would view Kurtz's fall not as mere madness but as the inevitable result of a system that demands total control to survive. Kurtz's famous whisper, the horror. The horror can be read as a flash of self-recognition. In that moment he sees the abyss he has helped create. Decades later, Francis Ford Coppola moved Conrad's story to the jungles of Vietnam in Apocalypse Now. Captain Willard's mission to terminate Colonel Kurtz becomes a cinematic meditation on the Vietnam War's moral muddle. The film's visual language, smoke-filled rivers, flickering lanterns, the relentless hum of helicopter rotors recreates the oppressive atmosphere Conrad described while placing it firmly in an American Cold War context. Coppola kept the line "the horror." The horror, showing how the phrase has become a universal shorthand for facing the unspeakable results of unchecked power, whether in the Congo of the 1880s or the Mekong Delta of the 1970s. Light and darkness run deeper as a motif across these works. Conrad's darkness is not just the absence of light, it is a palimpsest where European Enlightenment ideals are overwritten by the stark reality of exploitation. The blackness of the river soaks up the ivory towers of European rationality, turning them into something grotesquely reflective. In Apocalypse Now, the neon glow of Saigon's nightclubs clashes with the impenetrable jungle, suggesting that modern technology cannot shine a light on the primal savagery lurking beneath political rhetoric. This interplay challenges the Eurocentric claim that civilization equals progress, revealing a cycle where each supposedly advanced society repeats the same patterns of domination. Post-colonial scholars have taken this critique further by questioning the very language Conrad uses. Edward Said's idea of Orientalism finds a counterpart in Africanism, a discourse that paints Africa as a single backdrop for European drama. By letting African voices appear, even if filtered through a colonial narrator, Conrad unintentionally gives later writers a foothold to reclaim agency. Contemporary African novelists such as Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Chimamanda Adichie reworked the riverine setting, turning the Congo into a place of resistance rather than resignation. Their stories flip the power balance, letting the river speak for the communities it once silenced, and they weave local cosmologies that see water as a living ancestor rather than just a trade route. The ecological side of the river also needs attention. Modern research links the extractive practices shown in Heart of Darkness to today's environmental damage along the Congo Basin. Logging, mining, and oil pipelines now scar the same waters that once carried ivory and rubber. The horror therefore spreads beyond moral decay to a planetary crisis, echoing Fanon's warning that the colonizers' exploitation inevitably poisons the colonized land. Activists in the region invoke Conrad's tale as a warning, arguing that the same hubris that let Leopold II's private empire thrive now drives illegal wildlife trading and climate-driven displacement. Turning back to Marlowe, his uncertain role as both participant and observer offers a model for today's readers who wrestle with their own complicity. One bold theatrical experiment cast Marlowe as two characters at once. One voice speaks in the third person, cool and detached, while another, a physical presence on stage, reacts with raw emotion to the horrors unfolding. This split forces the audience to sit with the discomfort of witnessing atrocity up close. There is no safe distance here. Conrad's talk of a journey inward is not just about thoughts or ideas. It is about the body, the conscience, the gut. It is real, it is moral, and it shakes you to the core. Then there is the lingering myth that Europe stands at the peak of moral and intellectual authority. Conrad's writing is undeniably beautiful, precise, almost hypnotic. Yet beneath that beauty lies a blind spot, the assumption that European ways of seeing the world are the only valid ones. Post-colonial thinkers challenge this. They bring forward other ways of knowing, like the Ubuntu philosophy from many Congolese cultures, which values the deep connection between people and community. When you place Heart of Darkness next to these perspectives, the river is no longer just a path into darkness. It becomes a meeting place, a flowing conversation where different truths can exist side by side instead of fighting each other. Geography, psychology, film, symbolism, nature, and philosophy all twist together in this story. The Heart of Darkness is not a single, fixed point. It is a living, shifting crossroads where histories and meanings crash and blend like rivers joining into one. Every new reading, every fresh interpretation, adds another stream to this growing network of understanding. As you think about the themes here, the arrogance of empire, the shakiness of what we call right and wrong, the strength of those who endure, ask yourself how your own path of learning might become a force for change. Let the currents you follow guide you toward deeper understanding, sharper thinking, and, in the end, a fairer world.